Smartphones rule the world today, and two ecosystems dominate the mobile device market: Android and iPhone. But more than a decade ago, things looked completely different. Android wasn't originally intended to be a smartphone operating system. Its fate shifted due to a series of unexpected events. Google's acquisition of a small startup and the platform's ongoing development turned Android into a global phenomenon. That deal became one of Google's most successful investments, and the story of Android itself became a pivotal chapter in the evolution of mobile technology. Let's dive into how it all started and what led to its worldwide success. It all began in Palo Alto, California, in October 2003, when Andy Rubin, often called the father of Android, teamed up with Rich Miner, Nick Sears, and Chris White to found Android Inc. Their initial goal wasn't smartphones at all. They set out to build an advanced operating system for digital cameras. The idea was to create a platform that would make it easy to store, view, and manage photos and videos. But the team soon realized the camera market was too small. They pivoted to mobile phones, a sector that was exploding in the early 2000s. Their new mission was to develop a mobile operating system that could take on Nokia's Symbian and Microsoft's Windows Mobile. What set Android apart was its open-source approach, designed to attract manufacturers and developers. At that point, the iPhone didn't even exist, and the smartphone market was just beginning to take shape. Before long, Rubin hit a classic startup snag: a lack of funding. For engineers, the technology itself wasn't the issue. That's their bread and butter. But without enough cash, Android's progress was at risk. Even after Rubin poured all his personal savings into the company, it wasn't enough. To keep going, grow the team, and speed up development, he had to find investors. But here is the question: how do you win over investors? Rubin knew it wasn't just about having an idea. He needed a working prototype. He decided to start by building a demo version of Android to show potential backers what the product could do and why it had promise. From there, he'd craft a pitch to explain its applications and advantages. The small team got to work. Nick Sears and Chris White took on the task of coding the first prototype. Later, Andy McFadden, a senior software architect, joined them. His first job was to polish the demo and add key features like maps to make it more functional and impressive. After building the demo prototype, the team moved on to the next step: crafting a clear plan to convince investors of Android's potential. They put together a presentation that laid out what the system was, the opportunities it offered, and why mobile technology was the future. In 2004, shipments of personal computers hit 178 million units, while mobile phones reached 675 million, nearly 3 times as many. Yet the processing power of phones was still stuck at the level of PCs from 1998. Android didn't just foresee the mobile market's growth, it also recognized a major issue: the high cost of mobile software. At its core, technology aims to make life easier, and as it evolves, hardware tends to get cheaper over time. This pattern holds true for everything from TVs to computers to cutting-edge gadgets. Smartphones were no exception. The problem, though, was the software. Phone manufacturers weren't prioritizing it, which kept the cost of mobile operating systems steep. That's where Android stepped in with a game-changing solution. So how did Android break into the market when it wasn't the first mobile operating system, or even the most popular choice early on? One big reason was its open-source model. Put simply, Android was free. This approach let manufacturers use the system on their devices without being tied to software vendors, or having to build their own OS from scratch. Back then, that was a rare move, and it gave Android a massive edge. Here's a key detail worth mentioning. Remember Symbian? Back in 2001, the Symbian S60 platform launched, and over the next few years, Nokia cemented itself as the dominant player in the mobile device market. Up until the early 2010s, the company reigned as the industry leader. But things started shifting in 2007 when Apple dropped the first iPhone, followed shortly by the debut of Android's initial version. Despite these groundbreaking changes, Nokia kept its focus on hardware design. paying too little attention to software optimization. As a result, the user experience on Symbian devices began lagging behind the competition. As the iPhone and Android started gaining traction fast, Nokia's failure to adapt to the shifting landscape sent the company into decline, and Symbian was pushed out of the market altogether. Meanwhile, Android's approach made life a lot easier for phone manufacturers by solving the headaches tied to software development. That became one of the strongest selling points for attracting investors. So, once the demo, presentation, and Android concept were fully polished, the company kicked off negotiations with investors, namely Samsung and HTC. However, Samsung's representatives weren't sold on Android's potential. They pointed out that only Nick Sears was handling the operating system's development, while Samsung had a hefty team of 300 engineers working on their own OS. After striking out with Samsung, the Android team turned to Taiwan-based HTC. HTC showed interest but wanted exclusive rights to a single device, a stance that clashed with Android's vision of openly distributing its system. That's when Google entered the picture. But it wasn't just a casual funding chat, it was a buyout offer. Google made it clear they wanted to acquire Android outright. They explained that if the team agreed, they wouldn't need to chase venture capital, charge clients, or deal with carriers. The only catch? The system had to be distributed for free. In July 2005, Google snapped up Android Inc. for an undisclosed sum. Estimates range from $50 million to $130 million. For Google, it was a strategic power move. They saw the future in mobile tech and wanted a counterweight to Apple's rising star, which was gearing up to launch the iPhone. Andy Rubin stayed on as project lead within Google, and the team pivoted to tailor the system for smartphones. 2 years later, in 2007, the Open Handset Alliance was unveiled, a coalition of companies like HTC, Samsung, Motorola, and Qualcomm backing Android's development. That same day, to hook app developers, they rolled out the first Android SDK, Software Development Kit. Also in 2007, designer Irina Block created the Android logo. Inspired by bathroom door icons, it was made free for anyone to tweak and adapt. Then came Android 1.0 and 1.1. Starting with the next versions, Google began naming them after sweets in alphabetical order: Cupcake, Donut, Eclair, and so on, up to Kit Kat, when they even teamed up with Nestlé. The tradition held until Android 10, when they ditched the dessert names for plain numbers to keep things simple. Internally, though, the codenames stuck to the sweet theme, like the latest pair, Android 14 and 15, dubbed Upside Down Cake and Vanilla Ice Cream. If a beta for Android 16 drops in spring 2025, its codename's still under wraps. But going by the pattern, it might tie to a W dessert, like waffle, maybe. By the way, the first Android phone, the HTC Dream, known as the T-Mobile G1 in the US, hit the scene in October 2008. With its slide-out keyboard and touchscreen, it was far from perfect, but it kicked off a revolution. Android 1.0 handled the basics: email, maps, a browser, and an app store, back then called the Android market. Fun fact, it didn't even have a virtual keyboard at first. That came later. The real breakthrough arrived with Android 2.2, Froyo, in 2010, bringing Adobe Flash support and boosted performance. That same year, the Samsung Galaxy S dropped and became Android's first mainstream smash hit. The system's openness let companies like Samsung, Xiaomi, and Huawei tweak it for their devices, giving Android an edge over iOS, which stayed locked to Apple's hardware. Today, Android powers more than just phones. It's on watches, Wear OS, TVs, Android TV, and even cars, Android Auto. According to the latest figures in 2025, Android holds about 70% of the global mobile operating system market, while iOS hangs on to roughly 29%, leaving less than 1% for other platforms. That's how the Android acquisition turned into one of Google's most successful investments ever. As the saying goes, the best things are free, and Android is a perfect case in point. Smartphone makers can use the system at no cost, but in return, they're required to pre-install key Google services. Think search bars, maps, the App Store, and more. On top of that, Google insists the Play Store gets prime real estate on the home screen. Every time someone buys an app, Google pockets a 30% cut. That might sound small, but in 2020 alone, those fees raked in about $25 billion for the company. Toss in revenue from ads, searches, and other services, and Google's total profit from Android hit at least $31 billion. But the system's impact stretches way beyond dollars and cents. It's something money can't fully measure. Thank you for watching. If this topic caught your interest, drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and share it with friends. Thank you once again, and bye!